As we're working our way through the book of Job, we have come to chapter 32, and we're starting a new section, in a sense, in the study of Job. We have a new friend stepping up, and his name is Elihu. I want to come to him in a moment, but before we do that, look at verse 1. We found that Job has stopped talking. He has went off on a final rant about how good he is and how cruel God has been and how unjust God is being to him. And he stops talking. And at that point, we have a summary in verse 1 of chapter 32 of Job's spiritual condition. So if anyone has any doubts about where Job really is in his spiritual life, verse 1 here make sure that we understand it. It clarifies it. Verse 1, it says, Then these three men ceased answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. The friends give up. They have nothing more they can say. They've done their dialogue. And as we've seen, most of what they've said, or a lot of what they've said, is off base anyway. They all have the same worldview, and this is the problem, Job included. They all have the idea, this prosperity view of the gospel of life, this karma view, the law of attraction, all these different things that we find in our modern world, with the idea that if we do right and live right, then we will attract good things for ourselves. And good things will happen. You just have to believe it, maybe speak it, maybe have good mental, positive thoughts, and live a good life, and then you will definitely have good things happen in your life. That's the view of all these friends. They come at it from different angles, some from tradition, some from mysticism, some from the past observations, and so forth. And Job has not been exempt from that. At first, it looked like maybe he had been, but he is not. And Job has now believed, as we come to the end of chapter 31, that all of his wealth and his success and his good health and his great family and all the beautiful, wonderful things that had been part of his life were basically the result of his own goodness. It wasn't the grace of God, just the sovereign kindness of God that chose to give Job all these things. It was Job's goodness that deserved them. And because he was as it says in this verse, righteous in his own eyes, because as he looked at himself and surveyed his life, and as he has ticked off chapter after chapter, just how many wonderful things he's done, Job just feels he should have God's attention, and God should be taking care of him. And now that bad things has happened, Job needs God to answer him and explain to him why he would do such a thing, and then judge him on just scales and determine that God had made a mistake. And God would have to admit that, I guess, and then turn everything around for Job. So it's a very interesting place he's at. So I think we've got the heart of what's going on with Job. A blameless and upright man, we're told early on. And that was true in many ways. He was the best around. But down deep in his heart, there was a need for true repentance, not of his outward actions and behaviors, which seemed to be flawless, but his own inward attitude of self-righteousness. Job was a self-righteous man who believed that he got what he deserved. And when things went south for Job, when things turned bad, then he couldn't handle that because he didn't believe he'd done anything wrong. And the only reason why bad things would happen is if he had done something wrong, if he's wicked. So his whole worldview is skewed and messed up, and he's interpreting life through that. And so when we come to chapter 32, we come to the life of a man named Elihu. Elihu, we find in verse 3 in verse 2 and 3 has had enough. He said, "And the anger of Elihu, the son of Bechiah, and so forth, the family of Ram, burned against Job. His anger burned because he justified himself before God. And his anger burned against his three friends because they found no answer, and yet they condemned Job." So he's angry at them. 4 times in this chapter, it says his anger burns. We find later on in the chapter that he's a younger man. He has hesitated to speak because he's younger than the other friends. And apparently he's sat in the background all this time. But now finally he's had enough, and he's about to burst. And he says in verse 19, "Behold, my belly is like unvented wine, like new wineskins is about to burst. I've got to say something. I can't stand this any longer because of Job's self-righteousness and his friend's inability to help. So he's got something to say, and we're going to pick up on what he has to say starting tomorrow in chapter 33.